It's going to be another nerve-jangling week, you'd imagine, not only when it comes to looking at those banking stocks and the performance on the broader markets, but also we have a fresh batch of inflation readings, including one here locally, to get across what it might mean for markets. Peter McGuire from XM is standing by via Skype. Pete, good to have you back on the program. Again, lots to go and look at this week. What's going to be your focus? Is it going to be on the banks and some of the gyrations we've seen, or those inflation readings?
I think a bit of both, David, and good morning. Greetings from Sydney. You know, I tell you, it's Friday, I think, spooked a little bit, few traders, and it was certainly as far as that European situation with Deutsche Bank and how everything rolled. And then we saw a relatively nice uplift as far as US equities, and they closed relatively strongly, you know, 0.4 to 0.5 up. Nasdaq, I think, was up 0.3. So as I look here for this week and with the binoculars on, I'm going to keep an eye naturally on what we do Australia-wide. But I've got to take a very close eye as far as European and, of course, the US. So, yeah, big week for data drops, and that could really spook or spike markets as far as currency trading.
It's interesting because amidst all this turmoil in the banking system and pressure on some of those big household names that we're just talking about in the introduction, we have a really big release right at the end of the week, the PCE deflator, the core reading, which the Fed likes to go and look at. Over the weekend, we saw a number of Fed speakers still talking about the need to go and tighten rates further. Is that going to be the most influential data release?
I think so, David. As we leave into, we roll into April, it's that this week's going to be a very strong one later in the week, as you mentioned. And that's what everyone's focus is. So, we're looking at that US dollar index. We're taking on board what happens as far as the euro trading. And yeah, eyes are definitely focused on that read and see the impact it has and whether it, too hard to speculate on what that number's going to be, but yeah, we're all waiting for it to drop.
In contrast to a lot of other central banks, there's a widespread expectation building here in Australia that the RBA is likely to go and pause. We've got some pretty big releases coming up this week, including that monthly inflation indicator. It hasn't been around for a while, but when your sense, how does it go and stack up? Do you think it's going to be that influential on potentially what the RBA does?
Well, about 90% as far as probability at the moment that we won't see a rate rise in April. And when you're looking at it, December was about 8.4%, and then it sharply dropped in February. That was inflation, of course, to 7.4 in Feb. So let's see what this latest read is. And if it's better than expected, then that's going to really put a handbrake on the RBA moving forward. What we don't want to see is what happened in the UK last week, where it shot back up. So we've just got to take that on board. And again, we just wait for those numbers. But if we don't see any rate rise, then that Aussie dollar seems to be languishing fairly, well, pretty ordinary, actually. Like 66.54. It's about $1.50 to buy a US dollar, David. So pretty hard to travel with kids over to Disneyland for school holidays.
Yeah, no chance that I'm going to Disneyland anytime soon at this stage, particularly the Aussie at 66.5, as you mentioned. Just to finish off, one thing that's really struck me has been quite unusual, at least compared to what we've seen over the past couple of years, has been the resilience in crypto, Bitcoin in particular, over this period of time. Whilst everything else has been really volatile, it has been grinding higher. What do you make about that? And technically, how does it set up at this point?
Well, David, I mean, it's nearly 28,000 and it's off its highs that we saw in the last week or so. Just seems to be onward and upward. It's consolidating at this sort of price range, though, as you know, as you study it closely, it could just as easily be 23 or 33,000 over the next couple of weeks. So that's the bandwidth that it trades with. The inflation story, rates, keep an eye also on gold, but the focus very much from a trader's mindset, crypto has been dynamic. And the last month has just been, one-way traffic. Absolutely outstanding.